So, Lisa, what is your story?
So I'm a multiple survivor of suicide loss, which is a little unusual. I started as a survivor when I was 9 years old. So the first experience I ever had with death or with losing anybody I cared about was at the age of 9. I was taken by surprise when my cousin who lived up the street died by suicide. My parents were really honest with me even in the 1970s. This was in the late 1970s. They were super honest with me that his brain was sick and that he had taken his own life. And a year after that, when I turned 10 years old, my own father died suddenly. It was a heart attack according to the first story that I was told. And that was the story that I had for 35 years of my life. He was a very fit and healthy man, but he was also a smoker. And when my mother told me that it was a heart attack, there was no reason for me to question that because it seemed like it made sense. As horrible as it was, it made sense. So I grew up and lived my life and got married and started my own family. And then when I was the same age that my dad was when he passed away, he was 45. Ironically, when I was 45, I learned very much by accident that my dad had taken his own life. And that just completely gutted me. It changed the course of my life. It changed the course of my work. And only 4 or 5 years after that, I learned that one of our closest friends had taken his life very suddenly. So all of a sudden, I was this survivor, and I didn't know what being a survivor meant. I really didn't know very many people who were in the same situation. I certainly didn't know anybody who had ever grieved the same person twice, which I've now had to do. I mean, I spent 35 years grieving my dad, who I thought died one way, only to find out my dad died another way. And it took a long time. I mean, obviously, I'm still grieving. You're always still grieving. That never stops. But it took a long time for me to even just get my bearings because it was so impossible. The whole thing was so completely impossible to me. He was just such a vibrant, joyful person who was such a family man and so hardworking. And he just presented like he was someone who just loved life. So there weren't any signs and there weren't any red flags or concerns that my mother had or issues that my dad dealt with that we knew about. So when he died so suddenly, my mother, and she was the only one who knew the truth, she just decided in that moment that it was going to be hard enough for me. I'm an only child. So my dad was my person in the world. He was my best friend in the world. She knew in that moment that it was going to devastate me forever, that he was gone. She didn't want to then put a suicide on top of that. And especially, it was 1978. Nobody was talking about mental illness. Nobody was talking about suicide. There weren't groups or clubs or resources the way that there are now. So she
Taboo.
felt it was taboo. It was taboo. And it's still taboo in a lot of different ways.
Right.
Less so.
And so it's interesting the idea of grieving somebody twice because I've never, and maybe other people have, but I've never actually thought about that. I've never thought about grieving somebody twice. Losing them initially one way that you've thought, and then it sounds like for years that you thought that was the case, and then years later when you were his age, your mom, I'm understanding, told you the truth, and so you grieve again, but an entirely different way.
Yeah, and it made me question everything. It made me look back over every memory I ever had with my dad. And we did so much together. He was an outdoorsman, so we spent a lot of time climbing and hiking, and all of those memories just felt corrupted. All of those memories just felt questionable now. Like, was he really happy when we had that really great experience or we took that really fun trip? Like, was he really suffering? And that's what you kind of do. It's like rewriting the whole narrative kind of over the old one. and what's authentic and what's not. And I just was in this place for a really long time of questioning everything. And my husband was the one who actually kind of snapped me out of that headspace, I think, because I was really overwhelmed by the idea that it affected everything. It changed everything kind of instantly. And after a while, my husband just said to me one day, I know that you're feeling like it changed everything, and I get why, but it really didn't change anything. The only thing it changed was the way that he died. Not how he felt about you, not how he felt about mom. My parents had a beautiful marriage. They adored each other. And my father was suffering and we didn't know it. And you can't fix what you don't know is broken, you know?
That's from my experience, starting this series and interviewing X amount of survivors that I did interview and talking to hundreds and hundreds more. A lot of the time, from what I understand, that's intentional. So they hide, they mask, they put up this facade and this veil. I remember one person that I interviewed called it smiling depression. I think it was called. They hide their sadness behind a veneer of smiles.
Yeah, and I think that there are always two very distinctly different groups of people in the world. And what you're talking about with people masking like that is so, so common. People don't let anybody know that there's anything going wrong. They don't reach out, they don't share. It's completely invisible to the naked eye. And those are the people who are suffering the most. Those are the people who show up in their day to day life every day and they say, I'm great, I'm living my best life, I'm all is well, I'm happy, but they're really not. They're really miserable. And then you have the other group of people who you do know something's wrong, who do talk about it. Maybe you know they're in therapy, or you know they've been getting treatment, or you know that things are not okay. And it's actually a little easier to navigate because those are the people you know are struggling and you know keep an eye out, keep an ear out, pay extra attention. But it's those other people who are silently struggling wearing that mask that it's like you just don't know who's out there needing help. And that was what my dad was like.
And I'm sure in his case it was also intentional, and he was probably, I'm sure he didn't want to see his daughter, let his daughter know that he was suffering. And I think that's another thing that I've really noticed in talking to these survivors, that the like males like masked. It's, as a man you're supposed to be tough. You're, in society you're supposed to be tough. You're supposed to be the one that never shows weakness and all that. And so I think that plays a lot into it too, because especially as a father, I mean, I'm not a father, but I would imagine you don't ever want your daughter or your wife to perceive you as weak in any way. And so maybe that played into it a little bit as well. But that's another big thing that I've seen in my conversations with these survivors, is that as a man they don't want to seem weak. And even though it's not weak, you suffer the same as anybody else would suffer.
Yeah, but it's that stereotype that men have to deal with that has always been around, where guys can't cry and guys can't be emotional and guys can't show weakness and you've got to be the strong one and the provider and the hunter gatherer. That whole mentality, it's been around since the beginning of time. And when you think about when this all happened in my life, this was 47 years ago. This was at a time when nobody was talking about weakness or mental health or being depressed. And if you were immediately blackballed, you were immediately stigmatized. And my father came from a family that was part of the problem. My father had a really challenging family life with his parents and his siblings. It was a very tough family to be a part of. And he worked in the family business. He had his own full time career. We lived just north of Boston, and my father would commute to the city every day for his full time job. But my grandparents were in the real estate business. And when my grandfather passed away, my father took over everything. So my dad had two full time jobs. And there was nothing that my father could ever do that was enough. My father had every building filled, was more lucrative than anyone who had ever managed the buildings in the past, and it still wasn't enough. And he felt that pressure. And if he had ever said he was not okay, the optics of what that would have looked like in terms of the family reputation, was not something that would be tolerated. So it was a different world back then, and different kinds of pressure that we don't have today.
Even although today it still is stigmatized, mental health, depression, suicide to a degree. I mean, probably not what it was back then. Like you said, back in the 70s, 80s, they couldn't even speak about it, or they would be ostracized from society, families, whatever. But today, I mean, even still today, being suicide being perceived as weak, as being perceived as crazy, is still a thing, according to all the people that I've spoken to, and obviously society.
Yeah, it is. And it's sad. I mean, we're making progress. That much I know to be true. And I believe that to be true. Like, we're talking about it. Like, you and I are out there talking about it. And I know I'm out in my communities talking about it. And so many others are too. And it's all over social media. And you've got people who are influencers and high profile who are saying, I'm not okay. You can say you're not okay. So we've got things headed in the right direction, and therapy is definitely not stigmatized the way that it used to be. Like, you would ever say 20, 30 years ago that you went to a therapist and immediately somebody thought you were just broken beyond repair. But now it's different. So we are moving in the right direction. I just wish we were moving there faster.
Yeah, and it's I think part of it, at least from my my view and my opinion, like social media has given us an unlimited reach to the world, right? So maybe back then, you couldn't see so far outside of like your immediate like circle of friends. In the 70s, maybe you only really see what you're around, sort of thing. And now today, you open TikTok and you see videos from everywhere in the world. There's no bounds, there's no limits, and the fact that people are able to see how many people are suffering, and the thing, one of the most interesting things that I found since I started this series, and I've never suffered from depression or suicidal thoughts, but um, the main thing I found is that suicide doesn't discriminate. And before I started the series, I was naive to everything sort of mental health, and especially suicide. And I was like, oh yeah, in my mind, because the way that this series started was one of my friends saw a short film that I made with my brother for a film festival competition. It was about suicide, and he saw it and he said, hey, I tried to take my life. And I had no idea. I was looking because this, he's like 6'4", he's covered in tattoos, and he's not like the what you would think somebody, that would try to take their life would look like. And then since then, I've come to realize that there is no such thing as that. But like back then, I was just naive to, you know, um,
Yeah.
and it goes back to that whole masculine strong thing, but even more so when they're so it's somebody that's so strong, physically strong on the outside, and I think that also plays into it. Um, but I mean, today I look at all these celebrities like Robin Williams. All these people are you can't get more successful than that. Like arguably, the most successful comedian, comedic actor that ever lived in the history, of time so far, maybe. But I mean, if he could take his life, I know his situation was a little different because he had, form of dementia, but there's, it's not just him.
Oh, it's not just him, and it's everywhere. It's in every culture. It's the one thing, mental illness or mental wellness, whatever end of it you want to look at, it exists everywhere. It exists in every culture. It exists with men, with women. It doesn't discriminate, like you said, religion, background, your economic status. Nothing matters, because every single one of us is susceptible to any of these things, regardless of who we are, where we come from, how we live our lives. And that's why I feel like it's the great equalizer. Mental health is the great equalizer. I talk about this a lot. I talk about this subject a lot, not just my own experience as a survivor, but through a lot of the other advocacy work that I do. And I'm also a lifeline counselor, hearing all of these struggles that people from all walks of life are going through. And in terms of suicide being this unifying thing in the world, over 700,000 people a year take their life around the world. And for every one of them, 135 people are impacted by that, like friends or family members or acquaintances. So when you do that math and you multiply 700,000 suicides by 135 people for each one, you're over 94 million people in this world who are experiencing the thing that nobody wants to talk about. So that's why we have to be talking.
Yeah, I didn't know that statistic. That's a lot.
Hmm.
And I know that there's like snowball effects. Like somebody could take their life, and it could cause other people to take their lives, like in the family. Like it's a thing.
Yeah, it is a thing. People get desperate. People lose a partner and they feel like they can't go on, or people lose a child and they feel like they can't go on, or whatever the circumstance is. It definitely happens that way in many cases.
And
And
do you think that's because of they more? So I'm talking more now about a parent who loses like a child, because I've spoken to a lot of parents who lost their children, and one of the commonalities that I always hear from them is that they feel that they are to blame because obviously they're the parent. They were tasked with one thing in life is to protect that child, right? And then they go back and they question themselves, is it something I did? Did I do something wrong bringing them up? Yeah, I don't know.
I've talked to parents who have felt that way, many parents who have felt that way. I've talked to many people who have felt that way about their spouse or their sibling or their friend. Like, why didn't I see the signs? What did I miss? Why didn't I get involved sooner? That guilt piece is not restricted to just a parent losing a child. That's anyone losing anyone to suicide. Because when we're the ones who are left behind, there's no way in the world that you're not going to question everything that person did leading up to their death, question what you could or couldn't have said or did or didn't do. That guilt piece is real. That piece of being a survivor is one of those few little nuanced pieces of suicide survivor grief that doesn't exist anywhere else. If someone gets killed in a car crash or someone dies of cancer or has a heart attack, those are horrible tragedies. The one thing or two or three things that they don't have is that guilt piece. They don't have that, what should I have said? What should I have done? Or how could I have helped and why did I miss it? That doesn't exist. That's what makes being a suicide loss survivor so unique. It's so different. It's a very, very unusual kind of loss to navigate.
Yeah, and it's it's also interesting. So suicide loss survivor as a term, it's interesting because you have suicide survivors, people who try to take their lives, and then there's sort of the gray area in the middle that you don't really maybe think about so much as somebody who has lost X amount of people and how it's affected them. And it's interesting, and that seems like another area where there needs to be more attention drawn to it. Sometimes the whole suicide world as a collective is just either intentionally or unintentionally ignored.
Yeah, because no one wants to talk about it because it's messy and it's traumatizing and it's uncomfortable. And in a lot of cases, the way in which someone took their life can be horrifying. And there are details and elements of a suicide that just aren't present with other kinds of losses. And that's what makes the whole thing so scary. Nobody wants to touch it. The problem is there are 94 million people in this world every year who are dealing with it in one way or another. Maybe it was their person, their partner, their child, like we said, or maybe they're one of the other people in that person's life who was left behind. They're the coworker who sat next to them, or it's the soccer coach who coached the team, or it could be anyone anywhere. And then all of a sudden that person's gone and it's suicide, and nobody knows what to say. Nobody knows how to engage or how to act. And that's what we have to start doing more of, is having conversations about, like, okay, what scares you about this? Okay, what are you afraid to say or not say? Or how do you have a conversation with someone who's lost someone this way because it's so unusual and because it's so delicate of a situation. And look, there's there are definitely right things to say and wrong things to say. But if you're out here and you're listening to a conversation like ours now, and you know of someone who has lost someone to suicide and you want to show up for them, just show up. People just need to know that it's about just being present. It's about just holding space. It's about just being there to listen. That's all you can do. That's all anybody can do. It's isolating enough as it is to be this kind of a loss survivor. It's even more isolating when people are afraid to even interact with you because of it.
Yeah, and that's the wall that needs to be broken down, right? That stigma and that veil of whatever it is. It's scared. It's taboo. It's something needs to happen, and it like you said, it has been. And I mean, I'm assuming since like the '70s, we've come a real long way. But I think that it needs to continue and expand a lot more.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And the way it does that, I think, is like how there's any shift with anything. It's grassroots first before it's anything. It's people having the one-on-one conversations and maybe the bigger conversations and then the groups and the clubs and all of a sudden then media starts to shift and then there's a change in public perception and language. Language is a big part. When you think about how we all think about things in general, the perceptions that we have about the things that we think about and talk about are a direct result of the way that we talk about them. So I know when I was a kid, I mentioned that the first loss I had of any kind was a suicide. I was 9 in a time in the world when people didn't talk about it, but my parents did. So I understood what suicide was. But unfortunately, at that time, when people talked about suicide way back then and since the beginning of time, they've said committed suicide. And when you think about that language that's used, you think committed a sin, committed a crime. Uh, it's a negative connotation that surrounds that word. So if that's the only word that you're ever using to talk about this thing that nobody wants to talk about anyway, it's automatically stigmatizing people. It's automatically casting this negative shadow on this thing that really is not, I mean, obviously it's negative because it's a loss, but suicide is a product of depression, which is a product of mental illness. And mental illness is an illness. It's not something that you would fault anyone. Would you fault someone if they had a heart attack?
it's like
Would
any
you,
other disease.
right? Would you fault someone if they had cancer? No, you'd never be whispering about them or making judgments about them. But that's what people do about mental illness. And it's because of how we've been taught to talk about it. So it's when we make shifts like that, we start using different language. We don't say committed suicide anymore. We say died by suicide, or the person took their life, or they suicided. That gives the person the dignity that they deserve because they didn't do anything wrong. They just did the only thing that was still in their power to do to stop the pain that they were in. Because that's what all this is about. It's about people being broken, but just because someone's broken doesn't mean they can't be fixed or healed or find hope. But when you're in that headspace, the only thing that you maybe have control over is whether you wake up the next day and have to spend another day in pain or whether you don't. And that's why a lot of people make that decision because they don't get the help, can't get the help, don't know where to find the help. And unfortunately, they they can't see the other side. But
Right.
when we start really changing the way we all talk about this and interact around it, we'll see it change even more.
Right. One of the survivors that I filmed early on in the series, he said something that always stuck out of my mind, and it sort of kind of aligns with what you just said there. He said that everybody views suicide, and this is, I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember exactly, but everybody looks at suicide as, oh, it's cowardly, oh, it's selfish, oh, it's an easy way out. But to these people that are in it, they're suffering so much that they've exhausted every option, and they're not doing it in the mindset of, oh, my mom. Sometimes they do, but oh, my mom is, how's it going to affect my mom? How's it going to affect my dad? They're viewing it as through the lens of, hey, I've exhausted every other single option. Like, I just don't want to hurt anymore. I just don't want the pain anymore. And what he said always stuck out in my mind. He's like, it's the one thing that you could do that you have control of, because they don't
That's it.
have control over the suffering. The suffering is involuntary. It's like you said, it's due to whatever it is, the mental illness. But the one thing they do have the power to control is ending it. And I thought that was interesting because I was like, it almost sounded like he was endorsing suicide in a way, because then he went on to say that it's, in a way, this is contradictory, but in a way, it's a brave thing in the mindset, because everybody is afraid to die. So to be willing to step forward and end that suffering, obviously we're not condoning suicide in any way, shape, or form, but this is how he looked at it, as somebody who was suffering for so long and who attempted to take his life. And so it's just interesting to see from a survivor of suicide's perspective of how their brain was working in that moment, how they view the act of suicide itself. And that always
Yeah,
stuck
well,
out.
I can understand, I think, how someone might arrive at that, might think that. A lot like how there are people out there who feel like they're doing the people in their life a favor by ending their life so that they won't be a burden anymore. There are a lot of people out there in the world who just don't want to be a burden to their partner or their kids or their family, and that's what their decision is based on. So it's so hard to know what's really going on in the mind of someone who is in that place. But what's almost always going on, that we can almost be sure of, is that the person who is so in much in pain, they're not thinking about how their death in a lot of cases is going to impact other people. They're not thinking about what comes after for everybody they leave behind. They're thinking about ending the pain that they're in right now, and they are just taking the only option that they have. They're also not thinking about leaving people. They're not doing it to get away from their life or to get away from the people who they love. It has nothing to do with how much they love their people, like parents leaving children, spouses leaving partners. Like, they're not doing it to escape them. They're doing it to get away from the pain. So look, this all speaks to how unbelievably complex the mind of someone who is in that headspace is at that time. And that there are so many different factors involved and reasons and motivations, and everything is unique for everybody. But the bottom line, the one thing that kind of unifies all of it, is the idea that someone is in such incredible pain that they need it to end.
Right. And that's always been the common factor from what I've seen, speaking to the people that I've spoken to. It's always that they just want the pain to stop, period. Whatever that means, they just want the pain to stop. They don't want the pain. They're not thinking, like you said, they're not thinking about how it's going to affect their mom, how it's going to affect their dad. And maybe that's the selfish piece of the puzzle, because that's how the people who are left surviving feel. But maybe the person who is in there suffering every single day, all day, because somebody told me once it was like not like a switch, where like sometimes we have, somebody who's not suffering from suicidal ideation, something's bothering them, and like they'll go lay down, think about it at night, they'll go to sleep, they'll wake up the next day, and it'll be a little less, or maybe they won't think about it at all, or maybe it will still be there, but it'll wear off after a few hours after they wake up, or a few days or whatever. But to these people, from what I understand, the switch either A, does not go off ever, or B, it's in such long stints that it's just unbearable. And so maybe the way they suffer is different than the way that somebody who doesn't have that, I don't know what to call it, you know mental illness would suffer.
That's exactly what to call it, because that's what it is. It's because of that mental illness that there are things like depression and things like anxiety, and that suicidal thoughts come into the equation. It's all traced back to having that illness that needs to be treated, that needs to be talked about openly, that needs to be supported. And those are the things that are the X factors in all of this. That's what changes the outcome. It's talking about things openly. It's saying, I'm not okay. I might not know what to do about it, but I'm not okay. I need help. And not everybody has the help or realizes they have the help. I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, speaking now as a Lifeline counselor, everybody has help, because even if you have nobody in your family, even if you have no immediate support system or nobody in a community you can turn to, any of us can pick up a phone 24 hours a day and call a Lifeline, where there is somebody there to talk to you, to listen to you, to give you resources and support and de-escalate you. But it doesn't always feel that way, and people just don't always think about the resources that are out there, because when you're in that headspace, you can barely navigate your own thoughts, your own day to day. It's a struggle just to make it through the day. So,
And another thing that, speaking of resources, another thing that I heard a lot was that the a lot of the time these people suffering don't want to go to, like, in, I guess they call it inpatient, and be put in hospital. But so even for somebody who has, I spoke to, they say, so she got put into a facility where she had to stay for a bit. And the first thing that she got put there for suicidality. And the first thing they told her when they put her in there was, like, you cannot talk about suicide because you could trigger somebody. And so I always thought that was a real odd thing, because I've never seen the inside of one of these places, don't really know how they work, but it's like you're gonna put these people in a space with other people who are also have tried to do the same thing and take their lives, yet you're not allowed to speak about what you're all there for. And she told me that not once, she was there for 10 days, and not once was the word suicide ever used at all. And it's interesting because, I
interesting.
mean, maybe that has to be that way, I don't know, but how do you address something without addressing it?
Yeah, that's a complex situation. And I can only imagine that different facilities have different guidelines and different processes and different rules. And maybe because everyone in that facility was dealing with the same thing, maybe they just restricted it to one on one counseling. Maybe they didn't want people to talk about certain things in group settings. And I guess that makes sense to some degree. But maybe the way they handled it was in a one on one therapy session where they could talk freely and didn't have to worry about it being a triggering situation. But it's hard. It's like you have to be able to talk about these things, to be able to heal from them, to be able to identify what you're even dealing with.
Yeah. And so I guess maybe like um, the last thing I kind of want to talk about. So maybe there needs to be, there's just, it seems like that there's a gray area, right? Like, there's suicide, but there's suicide. Nobody wants to talk about suicide. And so there's that gray area in which it needs to be talked about more. And like somebody in a case like, your dad, how do you, how do you address something that you don't know is there? Like, when somebody is so happy on the outside, somebody's so strong on the outside like your dad, somebody's so funny and happy all the time like Robert Williams, how would you ever even know? And maybe the answer is that you don't. But how, I guess the big question is, how do you prevent somebody from taking their life if they're intentionally masking it and hiding it? I think that's the big question.
It's a big question. It's maybe the biggest question, because like I said a little while ago, when you're talking about people who are open with it, it's easier to navigate the situation, because then you know there's a problem and you can work together to fix it. This is a problem. This is an issue. And the way I think we do our best to deal with it is by looking after each other. Like we're all here as part of a bigger, broader community, whether it's you in a small community of maybe your family or maybe your friends, or maybe it's a wider community like your town or your workplace community. We all have to be checking in on each other. We have to be asking each other the hard questions. We have to be keeping eyes and ears open. And we're not always going to catch every single thing. It's just impossible to do that. But if you're having a conversation with a friend who you maybe don't really think that there's any reason to suspect that something's wrong, but you're close with that person, you could always just say like, "Hey, what's going on? How are you really? How are you really? Are you really okay?" Like sometimes we have to ask people the really really hard questions. Like, are you struggling? And at that point it becomes a give and a take. You can't operate in one direction only. It has to be you're getting something back from someone. But sometimes in order to get something back from somebody like that, you got to push beneath the surface a little harder than we do. And so maybe it means we all have to up our game a little bit, which I think at the end of the day we do. And I think at the end of the day, part of what helps us to find out what's going on beneath the surface of somebody who's masking is to just get really used to having deeper conversations with people. I think it starts there and it progresses to a place where people, oh, we're talking about that now. Okay. Okay. I guess I can talk about that too. I guess I can be more vulnerable about that too. So it's like a ripple effect. It's part paying more attention and it's part intentionally making our conversations go deeper.
So that more like proactive approach. I think a lot of people are afraid to do that too, also because they don't want their friend or their family member or whatever to think differently of them. That's probably also part of it. It's just it's a whole big thing that needs to change. I agree, 100%.
And I mean, think about it. When you're with a group of people you feel close to, or even a group of people you don't know, if you're in a situation where you're in a large group and someone asks a question and there's always like that awkward silence where nobody wants to be the one to answer the question, but then as soon as the one person answers the question and says, "Yeah, I was struggling with that," or "Yeah, my kids are really pissing me off," or "Yeah, I had a fight with my husband," all of a sudden everybody's involved in the conversation. Everybody's chiming in. Everybody's being vulnerable, and that's the point. That's what it takes. But we're still in a place where it's hard for the first person to raise their hand or to say the first comment. So it all goes back to the more we have these kinds of conversations, the more vulnerable each one of us allows ourselves to be in our day-to-day life, the more the people around us are going to feel like they have permission to do the same thing. And that's how we level up our conversations. And that's how we get better information about what's going on with our people, because now people are being more open.
So that level, yeah, be more vulnerable and check in on people more. Is really what it boils down to. I agree 100%. So, well, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. It was a really good conversation, and just thank you. Yeah,
You're welcome. Thanks for wanting to share.
of course. Thank you.